The forest was silent, until a single bark shattered the calm. Officer Mark froze as his K9 partner, Rex, lunged toward a snow-covered boulder, barking like his life depended on it. At first, Mark thought it was a false alert, maybe a wild animal beneath the ice. But then he saw Rex's eyes, wide, trembling, desperate. This wasn't an attack bark. It was something else. A warning, a plea. The officers laughed it off, until Rex began to dig faster and faster, his paws slicing through frozen earth. And when Mark finally knelt beside him and brushed the snow away, what they uncovered beneath that rock didn't just reveal a secret, would leave the entire unit in tears. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning was eerily still, the kind of cold that makes every breath visible and every sound echo like a whisper from the past. Snow blanketed the forest floor in a sheet of white, broken only by the crunch of boots and the rhythmic panting of a German shepherd. Officer Mark Reynolds adjusted his gloves, exhaling into the frigid air as he glanced at his partner, Rex. "Come on, boy," he murmured, his voice soft but steady. The K9's ears perked, his sharp eyes scanning the endless rows of frost-covered pines. They had been called out after a hiker reported something strange deep within the woods, faint cries near the old quarry road. Most officers assumed it was a false alarm, but Mark had learned one thing over the years. When something didn't feel right, it usually wasn't. The forest felt alive in its silence. Every tree stood like a frozen sentinel, and every gust of wind carried a whisper that made the hair on Mark's neck rise. Rex sniffed the air, his paws leaving precise tracks in the snow. His tail was stiff, his movements focused, alert but not yet alarmed. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We're entering the east perimeter," Mark said into his radio. A faint crackle responded, barely audible through the static. The deeper they moved, the quieter everything became. Even the birds seemed to have vanished. Mark's breath caught as he noticed Rex suddenly stop, nose twitching. The K9 stood perfectly still, head tilted, eyes fixed ahead into the dense white haze. Mark followed his gaze but saw nothing, just trees and snow. Then, without warning, Rex's body tensed. A low growl rumbled in his chest. His fur bristled. Mark frowned. "Easy, boy. What is it?" Rex took a slow step forward, then another. His snout lifted toward a faint shape barely visible between the trees. A large, jagged boulder jutting from the ground like a gravestone. The forest, once silent, was about to reveal a secret it had buried for years. Rex froze at the base of the boulder, muscles tight beneath his thick coat. His nose pressed to the snow, inhaling deeply as if searching for something invisible. Mark slowed his pace, eyes narrowing. The rock looked ordinary, weathered by decades of storms, but the way Rex's ears twitched told him this was no random stop. Then, without warning, Rex barked. Once, twice, then nonstop. The sharp sound shattered the silence of the forest, echoing through the trees like an alarm bell. Mark winced, gripping the leash. "Rex, what is it, boy?" But the dog didn't stop. His paws clawed at the frozen ground, snow flying in frantic bursts. He barked again, louder this time, a deep guttural tone that Mark had only heard in moments of extreme alert. Mark knelt beside him, feeling his pulse quicken. The cold stung his cheeks, but he barely noticed. "There's nothing here," he muttered, glancing around the clearing. Yet Rex kept barking, his gaze locked on a crack at the base of the rock. A distant voice broke through the radio static. "Unit 47, report status." Mark pressed his mic. "Still investigating. K9's showing strong alert behavior near a rock formation. Static." Then silence. The forest seemed to close in again, muffling every sound except Rex's furious barking. The dog began to dig, scraping the ice away with desperate energy. His breath came in white bursts. His claws struck frozen soil. Mark crouched lower, brushing away snow near the crack. Something glinted faintly beneath the ice on a small patch of fabric buried deep. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Easy, Rex," he whispered, voice trembling slightly. "We're not alone out here, are we?" Rex barked once more, a sound that didn't just echo in, it warned. "Mark, you good out there?" A voice called through the static as two other officers trudged through the snow, their boots crunching over the frozen ground. Steam rose from their breath as they reached the clearing. Officer Daniels squinted at the rock, his flashlight beam bouncing off its surface. What's going on? We heard Rex from half a mile away. Mark gestured toward the ground, still crouched beside his partner. He won't stop barking. There's something here, I can feel it. Daniels frowned. A squirrel, maybe? Or a buried carcass. He's picking up scent, that's all. But even as he spoke, Rex's behavior contradicted him. The dog wasn't just barking, and he was guarding. His stance was defensive, his teeth bared, eyes unblinking. Every muscle in his body vibrated with focus. Officer Lewis laughed uneasily. Man, your dog's gonna scare the whole forest off. There's nothing under that rock except ice. Mark ignored the comment. He had worked with Rex for years, through drug busts, search missions, even body recoveries, and he'd never seen him like this. No, Mark said quietly. He's not wrong. Rex let out a deep growl, pawing harder at the crack until his nails scraped against something solid. The sound made everyone pause. Daniels knelt beside him. Hold up. He brushed the snow aside, revealing a faint imprint, something rectangular, almost wooden, just beneath the surface. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. What the hell is that? Lewis whispered. Rex barked again, louder than before, circling the rock like he was guarding a secret. Mark's throat tightened. The wind picked up, howling through the trees as flakes of snow whipped around them. Call for backup, he said finally, eyes fixed on the buried object. We're not leaving until we find out what's under there. The wind bit harder now, carrying flakes of snow that stung against exposed skin. Mark stood motionless beside the rock, his breath heavy and visible. Rex had stopped barking, but his body was still trembling with focus. Every muscle locked, eyes fixed on the spot he had uncovered. Daniels shook his head. Mark, we should call it. It's freezing out here. Whatever's under there has probably been buried for years. But Mark didn't move. He stared at the faint outline beneath the snow. Something wooden pressed deep into the frozen earth. No, he said softly. Rex doesn't dig for nothing. You know that. Lewis sighed, rubbing his gloved hands together. You're telling me your dog can sense... What, ghosts now? Mark ignored the jab. He knelt beside Rex, placing a hand on the dog's back. What are you trying to tell me, boy? He murmured. Rex responded with a soft whine, pressing his snout against the icy surface. Mark's mind drifted for a moment. To another winter, another call. The explosion, the chaos, and Rex dragging him out of a burning truck before it collapsed. That day, Mark had sworn he'd never doubt his partner again. He turned to the others. Get the thermal scanner, he ordered. I want to be sure before we dig further. Daniels hesitated, but the tone in Mark's voice left no room for argument. Copy that, he muttered, heading back to the patrol truck. Rex's ears twitched, and he let out a low growl, almost impatient. Mark could feel it too. Something was alive in the tension of the moment, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He whispered under his breath, All right, buddy. I'm trusting you again. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, melting against Rex's fur as Mark crouched beside him. The canine stared at the rock with unwavering determination. Whatever lay beneath, it wasn't just a random discovery. It was something Rex needed him to see. The hum of the thermal scanner broke the silence as Daniels returned, his breath heavy from the cold. He handed the device to Mark, who knelt beside the rock once more. The red light flickered across the surface, cutting through the thin layer of snow. For a few seconds, nothing. Just cold readings. Then a faint orange patch blinked on the screen. Lewis leaned closer. That's heat? Mark frowned. Residual, maybe. Could be from something trapped beneath. Rex whined again, pawing at the same spot with urgency. His nails scraped against the ice, his movements desperate now. Mark's pulse quickened. All right, he said finally. We're digging. The officers grabbed their small folding shovels and began chipping away at the frozen ground. The metallic clinks echoed through the quiet forest, each strike sounding heavier than the last. Snow and dirt flew as the surface gave way to hardened soil. After a few minutes, Lewis stopped, eyes wide. Wait, Mark, look. A dark corner of weathered wood peeked through the earth just as Rex had indicated earlier. The box was roughly the size of a suitcase, wedged tightly beneath the rock's edge. Daniel swallowed hard. Looks old. Could be storage. Maybe someone buried supplies. Mark shook his head slowly. No, look at the wrapping, fabric around the edges. That's not storage. Rex's growl deepened, his tail rigid, fur bristling against the cold air. Mark placed a calming hand on his shoulder, feeling the dog's heart pounding beneath his palm. The men cleared the rest of the snow until the full shape of the wooden box emerged. Its surface was cracked, the nails rusted, a faint trace of cloth sticking from its corner. A cold dread crept up Mark's spine. He exchanged a glance with Daniels. "Don't open it yet," he whispered, voice tight. "Get the light closer." The beam hit the box, and in what they saw made every man freeze in place. The flashlight beam quivered slightly in Lewis's trembling hand as it fell across the old wooden box. Frost clung to its surface like thin white veins, glimmering faintly beneath the light. Mark crouched lower, brushing the snow from its lid with his gloved fingers. The wood cracked under the pressure, brittle, half-decayed, and a faint scent of earth and damp cloth rose into the cold air. Rex let out a low, uneasy whine, pacing in tight circles beside the rock. His instincts screamed of something deeper than danger. Something wrong. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured. His own breath came out shaky, the mist rising in thin ribbons before vanishing. "We'll see what you found." Daniels knelt beside him, holding the light steady. "It's sealed," he muttered, running a finger along the edges. "No latch, no handle. Looks like it was buried intentionally." Mark nodded grimly. "Then someone didn't want it found." He wedged the edge of his shovel beneath the lid and pushed gently. The wood groaned, splintering as the seal broke with a crack that echoed through the forest. The officers leaned in, the silence so heavy it felt alive. Mark lifted the lid slowly, and the beam of light cut through the shadows inside. For a moment, no one spoke. Inside lay a faded, dirt-covered jacket, small, worn, and torn at the sleeves. Beneath it, something else, a thin strip of blue fabric, wrapped carefully around what appeared to be an old weathered bundle. Daniels's voice faltered. That looks like a blanket." Rex whimpered again, stepping closer until his paw touched the box. His eyes didn't leave it for a second. Mark swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not just a box. It's a grave." No one moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if even nature itself refused to interrupt what they had uncovered. The box sat half buried in the snow, its lid tilted open, revealing the small, delicate bundle inside. Mark's flashlight trembled slightly in his grip as he leaned closer. The old fabric was wrapped tightly, layered with care, as though whoever placed it there wanted to protect it from the cold. A faded pattern, tiny stars and moons, peeked through the dirt. It wasn't just a blanket. It was a child's blanket. Lewis took a step back. "Oh my God, is that—" "Don't," Mark interrupted softly. "Not yet." His throat tightened. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering like distant voices. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. With careful hands, he brushed away the frost from the top layer. The fabric cracked from years of ice, revealing a small shape underneath, fragile, still, and heartbreakingly human. Daniels removed his cap, his face pale. Someone buried a child here." His voice was barely audible. Rex stood perfectly still now, no longer barking or whining. His eyes were locked on the tiny form. His tail lowered, ears drooped. It was as if he understood the weight of the moment. Mark exhaled shakily, his breath breaking. "Get the camera," he said quietly. "We need to document everything before we move it." Lewis's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. The light flickered across the blanket, revealing something else. A glint of metal tucked beneath the fabric. Mark reached for it carefully and pulled out a locket, its chain rusted but intact. Inside, behind a cracked glass cover, was a small photograph. A woman holding a baby, and beside her a German shepherd. Rex tilted his head slightly, staring at the image. Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. "Rex, she had a dog, just like you." And in that instant he knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a connection. Mark stared at the tiny photograph inside the locket. The woman's gentle smile, the baby cradled in her arms, the German shepherd proudly sitting beside them. Time had faded the colors, but not the emotion. There was love in that picture, and loss hiding somewhere behind it. Daniels stepped closer, peering over Mark's shoulder. "That uniform, that's from the northern township, the one that had the blizzard accident a few years back." Mark's eyes widened. "You mean the missing family? The mother and child who vanished on the old logging trail?" Daniels nodded slowly. Yeah, they searched for weeks but never found a trace. The case went cold after the snow buried the area. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The sound of the wind filled the void, low and hollow like an echo of the past returning to life. Rex stood silently beside the box, his gaze fixed on the photograph, tail barely moving. Mark's thoughts spun back to the night that storm hit. He'd been stationed only 2 towns away. Roads closed, families trapped, a rescue operation that went wrong. That was the same week he'd first been assigned to Rex. A cold realization crept into his chest. If this is who I think it is, he swallowed hard, lowering his voice. She must have gotten lost in the storm. Tried to protect her baby under that rock. Lewis shook his head, his expression heavy. All this time, right here beneath our feet. Mark looked at the photograph again, his gloved thumb brushing away a trace of dirt from the woman's face. She didn't give up, he murmured. She fought until the end. Rex let out a soft whimper, pressing his nose against the locket as if recognizing something deeper than scent, something in his bones. And for the first time, Mark wondered if fate had brought them both here, to finish a story left frozen in time. Mark's hands trembled as he turned the locket over, his flashlight flickering across the engraved words on its back. For my little angel, no matter what happens, Mommy loves you. His throat tightened. This wasn't just evidence anymore, it was a mother's final message. Daniel spoke softly, almost afraid of his own voice. Mark, you said the baby in that case was never found, right? Mark nodded slowly. Not a trace. Everyone assumed they both. His voice trailed off, unwilling to finish. Lewis shifted uneasily. Then what's this bundle doing here? If the mother died in the storm, who buried her child? Mark exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He looked down at Rex, who sat motionless beside the box, eyes locked on the tiny blanket, his breathing slow and deliberate. He's still sensing something, Mark whispered. The wind picked up, sending a chill through the clearing. Snow swirled around them like drifting ash. Rex's ears perked suddenly. He barked once, sharp and insistent, before lunging toward the box again. Rex, wait. Mark reached for his collar, but the dog pressed his nose against the side of the bundle, whining deeply, then pawing gently, not digging, but urging. Mark froze. He's pointing at something inside. With trembling hands, he lifted the edge of the blanket. Beneath the frozen folds lay a small sealed envelope, yellowed by time but still intact. Daniel's voice cracked. What is that? Mark's gloved fingers carefully opened it, revealing a torn piece of paper, handwritten, ink smudged by tears or melted snow. The first line made his stomach twist. To whoever finds this, please take care of my baby. I can't hold on much longer. I've covered her in my jacket to keep her warm. She's strong. She'll survive. Mark's vision blurred for a moment. The forest around him vanished. All he could see was that desperate handwriting, that final plea from a dying mother. He whispered, voice breaking. She didn't bury her child to hide her. She buried her to save her. Mark unfolded the fragile paper with care, each crease threatening to tear it apart. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible, a mother's voice echoing through time. He read aloud softly, his tone trembling with each line. The storm came faster than we could run. My car slid off the road near the quarry. I tried to find help, but the snow wouldn't stop. My baby was crying, she was so cold. I found this rock to block the wind. It was all I had left. Mark's voice cracked. The other officers stood silently around him, their breath visible in the freezing air. Daniels removed his cap, lowering his head. Even Lewis, usually the skeptic, stared at the ground, unable to speak. If anyone finds us, please take her somewhere safe. Her name is Emily. Tell her I loved her more than life itself. Tell her I'm sorry. Mark paused, the final word sticking in his throat. The letter ended there, abruptly, as if the woman's strength had faded before she could finish. Rex let out a soft whimper, pressing his head against Mark's leg. His brown eyes glistened in the dim light. She must have used her own body to shield the child, Mark whispered, piecing the truth together. She placed her baby in the box, covered her with her jacket, and hoped someone would find her before the snow did. Daniel's eyes widened. You think the baby lived? Mark nodded faintly. The note says she was still alive when the mother wrote this. He looked back at Rex, emotion rising in his chest. And maybe she did survive. Maybe she's out there, Not knowing the full story, the wind howled, carrying snowflakes that landed softly on the box, as if the forest itself was mourning. Mark folded the letter carefully, whispering under his breath, "We found her, ma'am, and we'll make sure Emily knows." Rex let out a low bark, almost like a salute, a sound that cut through the silence with haunting reverence. The forest was silent again, but not with peace, with reverence. Snow fell slowly, soft flakes landing on the open box as if nature itself was giving a final blessing. Mark stood motionless, the letter still clutched in his gloved hand. His heart felt heavy yet strangely full, like he was holding a piece of someone's final prayer. Rex sat beside the box, ears lowered, his gaze fixed on the spot where the blanket rested. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't barking or pacing. He was still calm, almost mournful. Daniels broke the silence. "Mark, look at him. He's not alerting anymore." Mark nodded slowly. "Because he's not sensing danger anymore," he said quietly. "He's sensing peace." Lewis frowned. "Peace?" Mark crouched beside Rex, running a hand down his fur. Dogs like him don't just track scents, they feel emotion, fear, pain, even death. But whatever spirit was trapped here, his voice softened. "It's finally resting." Rex tilted his head, eyes meeting Mark's as if to confirm it. The wind blew gently through the trees, whispering through the branches, carrying away the last echoes of the storm that had claimed a mother's life years ago. Mark let out a long breath and stood up. "We're taking everything back to evidence, Tai. The letter, the locket, the photo. The family deserves closure." Daniels nodded. "You think we'll find the daughter?" Mark glanced at the blanket once more. "We have to try. Someone out there deserves to know that her mother didn't abandon her. She saved her." Rex let out a soft bark, his tail wagging once, slow and solemn. Mark placed a hand over his partner's head. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "You helped her find her way home." And for a fleeting moment, Mark could have sworn he saw Rex's reflection in the snow, standing beside another German shepherd, watching over the forest in silence. The forest was bathed in pale blue twilight as the officers packed up their equipment. The investigation lights flickered against the snow, illuminating the rock that had guarded its secret for years. No one spoke. The silence was too sacred to break. Even the radio chatter had gone quiet, as if the whole world understood what had just been uncovered. Mark stood beside the open box, his breath visible in the frozen air. He gently folded the weathered blanket, brushing the dirt from its faded stars and moons. Every motion was careful, deliberate, like he was handling something holy. Daniels approached with a thermal tarp. "We'll transport everything to evidence in the morning," he said softly. "For now, let's seal the area." Mark nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "She deserves respect. This spot, it's not just a crime scene. It's her resting place." Rex stood guard near the rock, still and silent, his eyes reflecting the faint light. Snowflakes clung to his fur, giving him a ghostly glow. He looked almost statuesque, like a sentinel carved by time itself. Mark pulled a small cloth from his pocket, his own K9 unit scarf, and draped it over the box. "For you," he murmured, from one protector to another. Daniels glanced at him. "You think she can hear you?" Mark's gaze lingered on the rock. "I think she already did." The wind stirred gently, and for a brief second the forest seemed to sigh. A long, soft breath that carried a strange warmth despite the cold. Rex finally sat down, exhaling through his nose, his posture easing for the first time. Mark knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back. "It's over, buddy," he said quietly. "You gave her peace." And as they stood beneath the falling snow, Mark felt something shift in the air, a calm presence that whispered of love, loss, and gratitude carried on the winter wind. 2 days later, the police station's evidence room buzzed with quiet tension. The box, the blanket, the locket, and the letter sat under careful examination. The forensics lights cast a pale glow over the scene, while outside, heavy snow still drifted against the windows, the same snow that had hidden the truth for years. Mark stood beside the investigator's desk, hands in his pockets, Rex lying patiently at his feet. The forensic analyst removed her gloves and exhaled. "We've confirmed it," she said. "The materials date back almost 8 years. Everything matches the missing person case from the blizzard." Daniels frowned. "The mother's name was Sarah Collins, right?" The analyst nodded. Yes, and we found something else. She held up a DNA test report. The blood traces on the blanket weren't just hers. There was another sample, infant blood consistent with survival. The baby didn't die there. Mark's heart skipped a beat. You mean she made it? She did, the analyst confirmed, smiling faintly. According to the database, the child was found 2 days after the storm by a couple living on the Southern Trail. She was adopted, new name, new life. They filed the papers that same year. Mark felt his throat tighten. He looked down at Rex, whose ears perked up as if understanding every word. She survived, he murmured. That little girl survived. Daniels leaned on the desk, shaking his head in disbelief. 8 years. And all this time, nobody knew where her mother was. Mark picked up the locket, its metal warm from his touch. She knew, he whispered. That's why she stayed close on, even in death. She wanted her daughter to be found. Rex gave a single soft bark, tail brushing the floor. Mark smiled faintly, voice breaking. You were her compass, weren't you, boy? You led us right to her. And in that quiet room, surrounded by evidence of a love that refused to die, Mark realized this case wasn't about tragedy anymore. It was about faith, endurance, and reunion. The snow had melted into soft patches of frost by the time Mark and Rex pulled up to the small suburban house. The winter sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the quiet street. Mark turned off the engine and sat for a moment, his gloved hands resting on the steering wheel. Beside him, Rex tilted his head, sensing his partner's hesitation. Mark exhaled slowly. You ready, buddy? Rex gave a small bark, not loud, just enough to break the silence. Mark stepped out, boots crunching over the thin layer of ice as he approached the front porch. A woman in her 30s opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes were kind but cautious. Officer Reynolds? She asked. Yes, ma'am, he said softly, removing his hat. We spoke on the phone. I found something connected to your daughter's adoption records. From behind her, a young girl appeared, maybe 9 years old, with soft brown hair and curious eyes. She clutched a stuffed animal in one hand and peeked at Rex shyly. Mark smiled gently. Hi there. You must be Emily, the girl nodded. That's me. Is that your dog? Mark looked down at Rex. He's my partner, and maybe yours too in a way. The mother stepped aside, letting them in. The warm scent of cookies filled the air, a sharp contrast to the cold memories that had led them here. Mark sat carefully, pulling the small locket from his pocket. He handed it to Emily. This belonged to your real mother, he said quietly. She wanted you to have it someday. Emily opened the locket, her eyes lighting up as she saw the tiny photograph. That's her? She whispered. Mark nodded, emotion tightening his throat. She loved you more than anything. She gave everything to make sure you'd survive. The girl's lip trembled. She saved me? She did, Mark said softly. And this brave guy here, he patted Rex's head, helped us find her so you could finally know the truth. Emily knelt, wrapping her small arms around Rex's neck. The dog stayed perfectly still, eyes soft, as if recognizing her instantly. For the first time, the circle was complete, a mother's love, a daughter's peace, and a dog's unshakable bond all converging in one quiet, golden moment. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Mark stood by his patrol car, watching through the frosted window as Emily played in the yard with Rex. Her laughter echoed, pure, bright, the kind of sound that felt like healing. Rex trotted beside her, tail wagging, the years of training and hardship melting away in that simple, joyful moment. For the first time in days, Mark allowed himself to smile. He glanced down at the folded letter in his hand, the mother's final words. Gently, he placed it back inside the evidence folder, sealing it with quiet respect. Some stories didn't need to end with justice. They ended with peace. Daniel's voice came softly over the radio. Case files closing, Mark. You heading back? Mark pressed the button but hesitated before replying. His gaze lingered on Emily hugging Rex, snowflakes catching in her hair. Yeah, he said finally, voice warm, just giving them a minute. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. Somewhere deep inside he felt that the mother's spirit was at rest, that her final prayer had finally reached home. Rex returned to his side, pressing against his leg. Mark smiled, rubbing his partner's neck. You did good, buddy. You didn't just find evidence. You found hope. The camera would linger here, the veteran cop and his loyal K9 framed against the soft glow of the setting sun, the laughter of a little girl in the background. A perfect picture of closure, love, and loyalty. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes or badges. Sometimes they walk on four paws, guided not by duty but by heart.